Hi, everybody. I'm Rachel Morello-Frosch, and I'm one of the principal investigators of this study. I think I met some of you about 2 years ago when we did the last report back. So it's great to see you. The only thing better would be to see you in a real meeting, but it's a privilege to have you here, and I'm really looking forward to our discussion today about the results on the latest results that we have on the flame retardants.
Great, and we'll just introduce the presenters as well. Jess, if you want to give a quick introduction.
Yes, hi, my name is Jessica Trowbridge. I've been with the study for quite a while now. I started as a study coordinator back when we were doing sample collection and recruitment. So I met a lot of you, and I continued on as a doctoral student, and I'm now in the final stages of finishing my dissertation, analyzing the data from this study, and I'll be sharing with you some of the aggregate results from this study and talking to you about some of the information in the report back for you.
And after we hear from Jess, we'll hear from Nancy Biermeyer, ACPP. So Nancy, if you want to introduce yourself, that'd be great.
Hey everybody, Nancy Biermeyer. I'm a senior policy strategist for the Breast Cancer Prevention Partners, and our role in this was to work on some policy stuff. So you're going to hear about that later.
And our resident firefighter, Heather, if you want to introduce yourself, that would be wonderful.
Hi y'all, I'm Heather Buren, acting captain, San Francisco Fire Department, 24 years now going into, and I've been involved in this study since the get-go with all these great researchers, and so thank you.
And Heather and Ruth Ann will be walking us through an online report. So Ruth Ann, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hi everybody, really happy and excited to be here, and honored to be part of this team. I'm a research director at Silent Spring Institute. I'm a toxicologist and a chemist, so I study how to measure chemicals and what they do to people.
And I guess I didn't introduce myself. I'm the voice controlling things in the background. I'm Cassidy Clarity, and I'm the study coordinator for the current study, the Women Workers Biomonitoring Collaborative, and helping out with this as well. So all the emails and the pings and the things are coming from me. So happy to have you all here. And to start this off, Jess is going to give us an overview of the aggregate results for flame retardants. So I'll let Jess share her screen.
Great, thank you. Give me a second. Okay, so welcome everybody. I'm really excited to share with you the newest results from the Women Firefighters Biomonitoring Collaborative. And I really hope that this presentation will put some of the results that you've received in context and give you a chance to ask questions about your results and get some clarification if in case they're needed. So I'll first go over what the study's about. So reminding you what you joined back in 2014, 2015 when we started this study. Then I'll go into the updates on current results. We'll review the past results. So you have already gotten one set of results previously, so I'll review those past ones. And then we'll have a brief update on some of the policy work that has been in relation to this study, and that the results from this study have been used to advance policy initiatives in the state of California. So I'm excited to hear about those as well. So first, who is the Women Firefighters Biomonitoring Collaborative? It is a collaboration between firefighter organization, scientists, and environmental advocates. The study was started because firefighters raised concern about elevated rates of breast cancer among the women in their department. And they were actually the ones to get this study started. They were the ones to reach out to the scientists and environmental advocates to try to figure out what was going on in terms of breast cancer in the department and to get this study started. The study then aims to ask the question, are women firefighters in San Francisco exposed to toxic chemicals that are related to breast cancer? And are their levels higher than their non-female counterparts who work in the city in San Francisco? To do this, we recruited firefighters from the San Francisco Fire Department and civilians who were non-firefighter employees of the city and county of San Francisco. And Firefighters were involved in all aspects of the study, from the study design to the recruitment and interviews, and even helped us with the sample processing in the lab. You might remember during this, we collected a lot of data, and you might remember sitting through a very extensive exposure assessment interview where we asked you about the products that you use in your home, about the foods that you ate, and we also asked you about your work and your home to try to get an idea of where some of the exposures might be coming from. And we also collected biospecimen samples that included blood and urine. So that was an overview of everything that we did in the study. So now I'll move into the study highlights. So I'll go over who ended up being in the study, so who all of you are, who the participants are. I'll go over the flame retardant results, which are these new results that you recently received the report for. And then I'll go over the PFAS results, which were the ones that you received in 2018, but since it's a couple of years ago, it never hurts to have a refresher. Okay, so who was in the study? We ended up with 86 firefighters and 84 office workers in the study. The average age of the firefighters was 48, for office workers 47. So you can see in this table that the firefighters and office workers were pretty similar in terms of age, time of year on the job, and race ethnicity, which means that our groups were pretty comparable to each other. Among the firefighters, we asked very specific questions that were relating to their work. We found out that 18% of firefighters had responded to a fire or a fire training in the 24 hours prior to giving their samples back in 2014, 2015. 29% of firefighters reported using firefighting foam in the year prior to giving their samples. And most firefighters were assigned to the position of firefighter, one at the time of recruitment in the study, compared to drivers or officers. So this report back that you've recently received was all about flame retardant chemicals. And there are many different types of flame retardants. Here is a picture of one, it's an image of the chemical structure of one type of chemical that has a very long name, but is fortunately abbreviated to TDCPP, and it's commonly known as TDCPP. Flame retardant chemicals are often added to polyurethane foam, although their effectiveness as a flame retardant is questionable. And there have been changes over time as to which flame retardants are used in furniture over time. So we looked at several different types of flame retardants in this study. There are other sources of exposure to these compounds because they've been used in plasticizers, as lubricants, and hydraulic fluids. And flame retardants have been measured in fire station dust at levels higher than in homes and in offices. Some of the health effects that have been associated with exposure to flame retardant include mammary tumor development in animal and human studies. And it has also, TDCPP, the one in the picture, has actually been added to a list managed by the state of California called Prop 65, and it has been added because of its as a potential carcinogen. And other health effects from exposure to these compounds include hormone effects, so changes in thyroid hormone levels in the body, or developmental effects in infants and children. So here's a graph that you might recognize from your report. This is a graph of the aggregate results of flame retardants in firefighters and office workers from the study. And to give you a brief orientation as to what's going on in this busy graph, at the bottom, let's see if my pointer wants to work again. There we go. So here, at the bottom, you have all of the abbreviations for each of the chemicals that we measured. So each column is a separate compound. The line, the gray line, represents the limit of detection, and that's the level below which we can't actually determine the value that's in that compound. The red dots show firefighters, and the green dots are office workers. This black dot here represents the median, and that's a 50th percentile. So that means that 50% of the values fall below that point and 50% fall above that point. And the star represents a 95th percentile. So that's a measure of a high level of exposure. So 95% of the samples fall below that level. When we compare the firefighters and office workers, what we found was that 3 compounds, BDCPP, BCEP, BDCPP, and DBUP had much higher levels in firefighters compared to office workers. And if you look at this compound, BDCPP, we actually found that firefighters, the median level in firefighters was 5 times higher than the median levels in the office workers. For the other flame retardants that we measured, we had similar median levels of the compounds, most below the limit of detection, between the firefighters and office workers, but we still found differences where the higher levels firefighters still had higher concentrations of the chemicals than the office workers. In addition to comparing firefighters to office workers of the study, we also wanted to see how the levels in our study compared to levels outside of our study. And in fact, we used a representative sample of the US population. The CDC, the Center for Disease Control, runs this national study called the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey, or NHANES. And they sample people from across the US. And so we took the women from NHANES to compare the samples of our 2 studies. And that was represented by this gray dot here. And so when we compared the 3 compounds, which we found in the highest levels in our study, which were BCEP, BDCPP, and DBUP, we found that firefighters with the red dot had higher levels than the general US population for all 3 of the compounds. On the other hand, office workers had lower levels than the general US population for BCEP and DBUP, but they had slightly higher levels than the general US population for BDCPP. So overall, we found that firefighters had higher flame retardant levels than office workers, and firefighters had higher levels of these 3 compounds, which we compared to the general US population, while office workers had lower levels of 2 of those compounds than the general US population. So moving on to PFASs, the 2018 report back that you got was all about PFAS chemicals. And so this is a brief refresher on what we found and some of the updates on recently published papers. PFASs are these long chain molecules with lots of fluorines attached. Having lots of fluorines means that they're very stable in the environment and in people. PFASs have grease and water resistant properties, and so they're commonly added to food packaging like pizza boxes, frozen foods, paper food takeout containers, and they're also added to fabrics and furniture for their stain and water resistance. There's not a lot of scientific evidence on PFASs in general because there are many, many, many different types of PFAS chemicals, except for PFOS and PFOA. PFOS and PFOA are generally very well studied. So the information that I'm presenting about the health effects is in relation to those, specifically those 2 PFAS chemicals. So exposure to PFAS has been associated with thyroid disease, lower sex hormones, and they have also been associated with cancer in both animal and human studies. This is a graph, again, from your report back that you might recognize. It is of the PFAS chemicals in firefighters and office workers. The red dots, again, are firefighters, and the green dots are office workers. The limit of detection is represented by the gray line at the bottom. So again, the level below which we can't measure the chemicals in the body. And what we found here, if you look at the black dot, which represents the median level or the 50th percentile, we see that firefighters and office workers have similar median levels for many of the different PFAS levels, except for PFUNDA, where firefighters have higher levels than office workers, and PFHXS, where again, firefighters had higher median levels than office workers. We also compared the firefighters and office workers of our study to the general US population. We found that firefighters and office workers had higher levels of several different PFAS chemicals compared to the adult female women of the general US population, again, NHANES. We compared the levels in firefighters to another study of firefighters from Southern California, and it's a study that was done a few years prior to ours, and it was of male firefighters in Southern California. And when we compared the women firefighters of our study and the male firefighters from Southern California, we found higher levels of PFHXS in our study, but lower levels of PFOA and PFOS. And this might be due to changes in formulations in which PFOS and PFOA are phased out of flame retardant foams, for example, and perhaps PFHXS is being used as a replacement. Some of the additional analysis that we did involved looking at specific firefighter activities and how they related to the levels of the PFAS chemicals that we found in the body. And one of the things that we noticed was that participants assigned to the position of officer or firefighter had higher levels of PFAS levels compared to drivers. And while it isn't exactly clear what exposures are related to these exposure differences, we think that there might be some relation with engaging in direct fire suppression activities or use of firefighting foams that might contribute to some of the higher levels in these two groups. So in addition to looking at specific chemicals that were of interest to firefighters, we also did what's called a non-targeted analysis to be able to answer the question, are there other unknown or unmeasured chemicals that are higher among women firefighters? This process, non-targeted analysis, allowed us to scan, to screen the blood samples of firefighter participants for over 700 chemicals, detecting a wide range of chemicals without measuring the exact amount. This process is a multi-step process that starts with a scan of the sample to look for what chemicals might be present. We then match what we find to a database of chemicals to identify what chemicals might have been found. We then conduct statistical analysis. We then conduct statistical analysis on this matched list to identify chemicals that we're interested in learning more about, to then select a subset that we will then quantify in other chemical analyses. So we did this process with the Women Firefighters Biomonitoring Collaborative with your samples, and here is what we found. These 6 chemicals were selected for follow-up measurements because they were either frequently detected in women firefighters biomonitoring collaborative participants, they were more common in firefighters, or potentially linked to breast cancer risk from animal and human studies, so other studies indicating a link. For most of these chemicals, firefighters and office workers had very similar levels of exposure. However, like the other flame retardants, diphenyl phosphate, which is the metabolite of a flame retardant, was found at higher levels in the firefighters, suggesting a potential workplace exposure. And Dynaseb was also found more often in firefighters, but overall it was detected in very few participants. And we're particularly curious about Dynaseb because it is a chemical that was banned, previously banned as a pesticide, but is still found in other products and has actually been found in weight loss, found in some weight loss supplements. The results from this study, the PFAS analysis and the development of this method on the non-targeted analysis, which I just talked about, have both been published in scientific journals. We're very excited about that. That was earlier this year. They can both be found on our website, and we currently have 3 more papers in the works that we're hoping to submit to scientific journals for publication in the coming months. So you can find our published papers and any papers that come up or updates about the study at our website, biomonitoringcollaborative.org. And so with that, I'd like to thank all of the participants of the study. Without you guys, this would not be possible. Thank you to the firefighters and the study team, our funders. And here is the list of everybody that's been involved in our study, our study team that has been involved in the study, and our contact information. So thank you. And I can take I'll take a few questions, right, Cassidy?
Yeah,
if anybody,
just a couple right now. I just wanted to remind people before we do questions that if you'd like to change your name, you can on the little dots by your photo. There's 3 little dots by your photo that's easier to see once we stop sharing, and you can click that and click rename and change your name if you'd like to be anonymous during the Q&A session. So we are recording, and we'll be recording these couple questions for just now. Once we start the longer Q&A session at the end, I will stop recording. But yes, we can take a couple questions right now before we move on to Nancy.
So I can take some clarifying questions if you have specific questions about what I've just presented, and if there are larger questions, we can save them for the full-on discussion Q&A later. So
Jessica, I have a
Hi, this
question,
is
which
Swati
is,
Sharma. I was one of the participants. I had a quick question about the non-targeted chemicals that you had like 1 or 2 slides previous. I do you have information on individual results for that as well as aggregate results? Because I don't see those chemicals in our reports.
We did not share the individual reports, the individual levels for these specific chemicals. We just shared the aggregate results.
Jessica, can you hear me?
Yes, Charles.
Great. I just wondered under health outcomes related to PFAS exposure, why immunosuppressant wasn't included, because that seems to be getting a little more solid as time goes by. The C8 panel today, or yesterday, just released a report confirming that.
It's a good question. It wasn't excluded for any particular reason. I think we were trying to focus on the chemicals that were really relevant, the health effects that were particularly relevant to cancer, and demonstrating why we selected these chemicals. But there are multiple health effects, and we kept getting new data almost on a day-to-day basis as these chemicals become more and more studied. So definitely there's other health effects that are being impacted, that could be included. I mean, there's many, so we're trying to, for simplicity's sake, I think we were just trying to keep the list short, but there are many more.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Jess, a question in the chat. Can you go over what BDCPP, BCEP, DBUP, and PFHXS are briefly?
These are the abbreviations for the different chemicals that are that were measured. So PFHXS is a PFAS chemical that stands for perfluorohexane sulfonate. And the DBUP, what was the other, BCEP? Sorry, you're on mute.
BDCPP. Yeah, just the ones that were higher in the firefighters, the metabolites.
These are all different different molecules of flame retardants that, if I'm happy to share the chemical name with you, but they're different chemicals that we measured in the body.
Within your individual report, you can see the full name of each chemical as well, and I think both the name of the parent chemical and the name of this metabolite, which is the thing that we actually measured. But we can certainly show them to you on screen as well.
Maybe we can show with the report back itself, because I don't know if I have them written down in my slides.
Yeah, I think when Heather's zooming through the report back, will probably come up then. So
I can also look them up. So thank you. I realized that after asking.
No, it's okay. And it's a good question, because they're multiple different chemicals, and their names are just so long that it's harder to say dibutyl phosphate or a million times. So anyway, thank you very much. Stop sharing. I meant to do that actually, but you know, technology.
well, if there aren't any more questions on Jess's presentation, we can move on to Nancy, who's going to tell us what this sort of work has been helpful in for policy stuff that BCPP is doing. So Nancy, take it away.
There we go. I think we have both the screen and my voice. Do we? Are we good?
Yep.
We're good.
So I want to talk a little bit about how we're using this data in changing the world, basically, and why your participation has been so incredibly important. So you heard about the results you got on the PFAS chemicals that the biomonitoring was done with, and you got those results a little while ago. And one of the major sources of these chemicals, at least in drinking water, is from these firefighting foams, and that it suggests that that's also a major source of exposure for firefighters. PFAS are found in lots and lots of different products. And one of the things I just wanted to mention, and it's a little bit relevant to the flame retardant statement, is these chemicals, like there are like 5,000 different PFAS chemicals out there. They're a class of chemicals. Companies switch them in and out, and it's really hard to keep track of what chemicals are being used in what products, and that's why, you know, it's a little bit of a moving target, and I suspect that's true in many ways of different flame retardant categories. But that's why it's so important to treat PFAS as a class when it comes to the policy work that we're doing. So it is used in these aqueous film forming foam, say that 3 times fast, which are foams that are used on flammable liquid fires, so gasoline, oil, different chemicals. We do believe it's a source of firefighter exposure for those folks who use those foams. And we know it's a major source of drinking water contamination. Currently, estimates are that about 19 million Californians get their water from a water system that's contaminated with PFAS. And that number is likely to go up as we test more of those water systems out there. And what is both fortunate and it makes it unclear why we haven't moved away from these is that there are safer and effective and affordable alternatives out there. And those alternatives are in use across the country and worldwide. So there's no reason to use these foams in the vast majority of situations. So it's important that we make policy change to make sure that we do shift to these safer products. Along those lines, we worked on a piece of legislation, SB 1044, which would which would stop the use of firefighting foam that contain PFAS chemicals. The author was Senator Ben Allen from Santa Monica, and you can see the list of co-sponsors there. In California, legislation actually has formal co-sponsors that are organizations that support and work on the bill. And one of the important ones there is the California Professional Firefighters. We needed the voice of firefighters in this discussion because obviously you all are the most directly impacted. But there are a number of other groups, including our organization there. We were incredibly successful in moving this legislation through the Senate and the Assembly. We had basically unanimous votes through all the committees on a floor vote. And that was largely because we worked with both because of the concern about PFAS and drinking water, concerns about firefighters, but we also worked with the petroleum industry and the chemical industry to get them to remove their opposition through some amendments that we took to address some of their concerns. So that bill is now sitting on the governor's desk awaiting his signature. So what's the bill do? We're going to run through these a little quickly. The bill prohibits the manufacture, sale, or use of Class B foams that contain PFAS by the beginning of 2022. And I emphasize use here because there are laws in other parts of the country that ban the manufacture and sale. But to date, California is the only state that is banning the actual use of these products by a date certain, which is January 2022. It also bans the use for training purposes, although I think most municipalities and frankly most refineries have moved away from using these foams with these toxic chemicals in them just for training purposes. It has a provision that allows municipalities to be reimbursed for foam that they buy between January 2021 and March 2022, so that if a municipal fire department buys these foams for use before the prohibition goes into place, they're able to get it recalled and reimbursed. And for that unused foam, that recalled foam, there's a provision that requires that they be safely transported and that they be stored until a disposal solution is found. One of the challenges with a piece of legislation, or the challenges with a chemical like PFAS, is you heard that they are incredibly stable in the environment. We call them forever chemicals, is that they don't break down. And some of the processes that have been used to try to dispose of them, things like incinerating them and putting them in landfills, end up just exposing the communities, which inevitably are environmental justice communities, to either pumping those PFAS chemicals into the air or having them leach from landfills into the water. So we tried really hard to make sure that didn't happen, and required that companies store them until California EPA came up with an acceptable way to dispose of these products. And then finally, there was a provision that required that as purchasers of firefighting gear, you had to be notified if that gear had intentionally added PFAS chemicals in them. So it's not a ban, but it gives firefighters the right to know if the gear that they use, like turnouts, have these chemicals in them, so they can take steps to try to protect themselves from that route of exposure. So there were a number of exceptions and waivers. As some of you may know, right now, the Federal Aviation Administration requires that airports use foam that includes PFAS. So it's actually written into the law that or to the regulation that they actually have to use foams that include these chemicals. Congress has told them that they must end this requirement by October of 2021, but just because airports are not required to use them, they still could use them. And so this law says that once that federal requirement is gone, they have to shift to the non-PFAS containing foams, which are used across the world. Like Heathrow Airport doesn't use foam that includes PFAS. So it's, there are well-established alternatives available. There's a delay on fixed suppression systems. So if it's a system of piping in something like a chemical plant or a hangar at an airport, they get a little extra time to switch out those systems to non-PFAS foam. And then for refineries and terminals and chemical plants, they have to end their general use by 2024. But for very specific fires, so fuel and depth, if there's a location where fuel could possibly get up to a depth of 6 inches, they're allowed to use PFAS containing foams. And for atmospheric tank fires, these are massive tanks that contain thousands and thousands and thousands of gallons of these flammable liquids. They are allowed to use PFAS containing foams until 2028. And then they're also allowed to request a waiver from the fire marshal. And then the end date of those waivers will be 2032. But to get the waiver, they have to show that non-PFAS foams haven't been used for that specific purpose anywhere in the world. So, and then finally, if they do use them, they have to contain them so that the runoff doesn't run into the environment. And they have to report to the state that they've used it. So we have a sense of how many different fires have used these chemicals, these foams with these chemicals in them. So that's a quick overview of what's in the legislation. As I mentioned, it's on the governor's desk. They have, he has until September 30th to sign it. That's the deadline for him to take action on all the legislation that has come out of the legislature. And I just included here an example of how we used the study that you all were a part of. And we used it in a number of different ways. But the final coalition letter that we put together to send to the governor talked about biomonitoring levels of PFAS chemicals in firefighters. And we specifically cited this study of the recent study of women firefighters in San Francisco. And in the actual letter, there's a citation that includes like a footnote that includes the actual citation for the study and the journal article that came together from this study. So I would love to have folks go onto our website and send a letter to the governor asking him to sign this legislation. And with those letters, you can personalize them before you send them. And so for those of you that are firefighters, it would be great for you to put in there, as a firefighter exposed to these chemicals, I urge you to sign this piece of legislation. So that's all I have. So let me stop sharing. And I'm happy to answer any questions in the course of the Q&A.
Wonderful. That was really great.
And I'm also going to put a link to that action in the chat. So look for that in just a second.
Hello, I have a question.
Sure, go ahead, Anne.
Does that legislation allow, if this governor doesn't sign something, does it automatically become law? Because in San Francisco, most legislation, if the mayor doesn't sign it by a certain date, it automatically becomes law.
You know, I think that's the case, and I should know that. I actually was wondering that myself. I think if he doesn't sign it, it does become law. He has to proactively veto it for it to have to go back to the legislature. That's my understanding.
Yeah, I double checked that yesterday with Lizette. Unless he proactively vetoes it, it becomes law. But it would be nice for him to sign it.
Thank you.
I have one more question, which is kind of totally unrelated, but with these current wildfires, there's all that flame retardant that's being dumped from planes. I know that's a different substance, but that's the volume of that is huge. And it's also in areas where there's going to be a lot of water runoff. I know you can't answer this question, but that kind of alarms me now that you're talking about this.
It is alarming. As far as we know, they do not use PFAS in those foams, but that doesn't give me much comfort because I don't know what chemicals they do use. And there are obviously lots of chemicals of concern out there. So yeah.
Nancy, Cheryl here, we actually tested Phos-Check samples of that kind of foam that's dropped from planes that we got from California Fire, and there are very small amounts of PFAS chemicals. I can send that to you if you want to take a look at it.
Do you think they're intentionally added, or they're just contaminants from
Hard to say.
the fact that we're exposed to that stuff all the time?
Yeah, it's hard to say.
Yeah. Okay, great.
I'll send it to you. We had it tested at OSU in Genfield Lab.
Great. I was not aware of that study, but we didn't focus on the firefighting foams because there's a much clearer connection to the stuff that's used in municipalities and
oh, absolutely, absolutely. And just telling the firefighters around here for the fires that are happening in Northern California, they don't like to use it because that kind of foam doesn't get down to where the embers are going from, under the bush to shrub, and that it's not very effective. So it's kind of a last resort use, I think.
And just to reiterate, there is a link in there for folks who want to take the action from our website to write a letter to the governor.
Great job, Nance.
Thank you. Well, thanks to all of you for creating an atmosphere where this is something that we could get strong bipartisan support on a piece of legislation like this.
It's a big deal.
Wonderful. Yeah, thank you so much, Nancy. It's really great to see this kind of stuff coming through from our studies and a lot of other work too. With that, I think we will hand it over to Heather, who's going to share her screen and walk us through an example of a Derby report. All of you participants have received a Derby report, and Heather's going to scroll through her report just to make sure that everybody knows all of the links that they and what's available to them here. I know we had some questions about what the different chemicals are earlier after Jess's presentation, and certainly you can find a lot of that information on your report. So hopefully we'll be able to see that here. Thanks, Heather.
Sure. Hi.
Sorry, if I can just there was a question in the chat box of the last, does anyone know what kind of flame retardant chemicals they're spraying on land around the wildfires or to protect from wildfires? I don't know the answer to that, but I wonder if anybody else here does.
Well, don't really know, but what we talked to Adam Wood about, we asked him to get us some samples of the kind of foam that was used from airplanes predominantly. And it's called, there's a bunch of different kinds of Phos-Check.
Oh, no, I think the question's about flame retardant chemicals that people spray on land or on their, maybe on their roofs or houses sometimes.
Oh, okay. I don't know about that.
Two just little tidbits that I was also going to interject. Well, one is that given that the firefighters have these higher levels of flame retardants, we are doing some follow-up work to try to figure out what were the specific, if we can figure out specific sources of those. In particular, we're looking at seeing whether we can test some gear and recreate some historic gear uses to help us see whether, in particular, the one called chlorinated tris, whether we can figure out what was an important source of exposure for that chemical. And we're also doing, in this new phase, a time series with the firefighters where we collected samples within 24 hours of a fire, and then I think a week after, and then a month after. And we'll be using the non-targeted analysis to try to identify exposures associated with fire events. Because in the first round, the firefighters may have been many days or weeks away from a fire event. And then the last piece is that in the new study, we also are using, we've biomonitored a group of nurses from UCSF. Several of their leaders are, and the investigators that are collaborating with us on that are on this call. And so we'll be comparing, using the non-targeted approaches to try to see what exposures are unique to nurses, comparing them with a new round of office workers.
Okay, we ready to jump into report?
Yeah.
Okay, let me share again then. Okay, so I just want to give a really, just a little quick story, because I like stories before I start on this. As I was beginning in this study back in 2012, 2013, when we were looking at how to get funded, and I happened to go with a friend of mine because he asked me to join him to a report back of a different scientific study, not ours. It was, and they were all to meet, and back when we got to meet together, they were to meet in this one area, and there was the scientist there, and she handed out a piece of paper that had all of these long names, not even like the DCPPP, but these long names. She talked for about 10 minutes, and I think I understood about 4 words she said, because it was very sciencey. And then she said, okay, are there any questions? And there were about 40 participants in the room, and they were holding their results. And then she said, okay, it was over. And we got up and we were walking out, and my friend took his results and he just threw it in the trash. And I said, well, did you understand that? And he said, no, nothing. And I didn't either. So I just tell you that because as we go into going through this report for a few minutes, it was so on the front of my mind. It had been throughout this whole study that I've been working on, how important it was for us firefighters and office workers that were a part of this study to understand what our results were. That the scientists do a lot of other things with this, but for us to at least have a basic understanding. And this derby, or this what we're going to be going through, this report, is so much more than that. And it's really, really awesome as a layperson, as a firefighter, to get this and be able to understand it. And if I don't understand it, there's places I can play around. So I'm just going to go through real quick. So you get to this page. This is your home page. Once you have signed in, you answered a few questions that we asked you to answer, and then it brought you to this page. And just know that throughout, while you're going through and you're just exploring in this, there's many ways to do the same thing, and that the information is in different places. But so what I'm going to go through real quick is just this left side here, and this is just kind of our home screen is here. And as you can see, this is my results we're looking at. It says the chemicals that we found, the flame retardants, some overall study results. So you see that over there, and then you say your results. I'm not going to quite click on that yet because I just want to go straight down. Then you see this overall study results. So we know the difference between that. These are my actual levels. And then this overall study results is really what we call, or scientists call, aggregate data. So that's when it's put all together. Then the methods was how we did this. And then this is a part that I really like is talking about if you had different levels or high levels, how you could maybe reduce some of those exposures. And then table of your results. And then you can even print it if you wanted to print it and bring it to your doctor, or you were interested to put it and you could print it. So that's just anytime you need to come back to this, you just press your home screen. But we're going to move into my results because I'm one of those people that likes to get right to the chase, right? So this comes up and I say, okay, what are my results? I want to see what my flame retardant results. So I'm going to hit that flame retardant results, and it brings you right to a results page, just like that. And so if I don't want to read about where did these chemicals come from, if I just want to go right down, I can click here and it can go right to my results, or I could just scan down. But before I do that, I want to point out, here are some really common questions. So as you're looking at this, or as you have already looked at this and you have questions that come up, how can I reduce my levels to these chemicals? We talked about this. What did they test for? Things like that. They're just kind of basic questions, and you can press on one of those and it will give you the answers to that. But I want to now I'm going to jump down to my results for flame retardants. Jessica did a really nice job of going over this. And this is just kind of our little graph legend up here. But the things I think that are interesting is you're the orange dot, or I'm the orange dot on this one. And then your study median, we talked about that. The median chemical level for women, that's the NHANES, that's the little American flag. So let's just go down one. So this is this BDCPP. So Tiff, this was for you. So as you look, the name of that actual chemical is right next to it. And I'll give you $10 if you can say that fast. I can't, but that's partly why Jessica was saying the BDCPP, or all of them. So you'll see. But what I really like about this is as you come down onto here, I can look at it right away. See, this is me, right? My results were pretty high on this. But as I go through and I hit on different things, it will let me know what they are. So if I forgot about that legend, so each blue or purple, you see how when I roll over it, you call it just a rollover. Each or blue or purple circle shows the amount of a chemical in another person's sample. So these are our office workers up here, and then these are our firefighters down here. So you don't see a lot of them here, but another thing, as I'm going through this, you're able to explore in what is interesting to you. But we go through all these chemicals. We have the BDCPP and the BCEP. We go down next. Something to note that I think is all of these gray dots that you see over here, and you can roll over it, it'll tell you exactly what it is. Each gray circle is a sample where the chemical wasn't found. And so that's interesting to me, because as we're looking down and we go a little further, like we see here, it wasn't found in a lot more office workers than firefighters, or same here. And then we get down into some where it really wasn't found hardly in any office workers or firefighters. Like, so this is my dot. So if you see your little orange dot, I'm down 3 on BDZP. And I'm over in this category, and I think, well, what does that mean? Well, that's actually good. It means that they couldn't detect it. It was so low that they couldn't detect it. And that's really what I would like for me to see for all of mine. I sadly didn't, but as you can see, as we go through that, it was really these top ones that we saw in most all of us. So that's kind of the results there. Now, if at any time I'm going down and I'm like, oh, I wanted to kind of go back, you're going through all of your results. You can just scroll all the way back up to the top. Where did the chemicals come from? We talked about that. And so it's just, as you want to dig deeper, kind of, I think you can. Reducing exposures for firefighters at work. So I'm just going to look at that real quick. And this talks for firefighters. So talking about all of these best practices that I'm talking about all the time, and we all should, but it's some basic things. So during and after a fire incident, through collective action. I've seen this and I really like that it's on here. So this is also where we could do some of that work and sign that, that legislation for Nancy and for that for, you know, working on getting the PFAS out. So it gives you some ideas. Another thing I think it was interesting if you're science-minded, or if you want to become more science-minded, you can go to this table of your results. And this covers both our flame retardants and the PFAS. And so this is another place where you can see the name of all of those chemicals if you wanted to. It's kind of like it condenses it, right? So you have your chemical, you have your measurement. The thing this doesn't do that I really like about graphs is that it kind of, we like to compare ourselves to others. I think it helps us give a point in time, or, you know, so I can compare to firefighters and compare to everyone. So this doesn't really tell me much about this measurement in relation to others, to, you know, women, the NHANES or anything, but it's another way to, if you wanted to download this and take a look at it and look them up, it was another way to do that. If while you're in this table of results and you wanted to just say, oh shoot, I forgot what was BDCPP, so I can hit that and it will bring me back to my results and it'll give me that idea of where that is, right? So let's see, what else did I want to, in this right-hand corner down here, if at any time while you're going through this, something comes up, you can't find questions up here to be answered, and you just want some help interpreting these results, you can do an email or you can make a phone call. And we will answer those for you, and the scientists will help you out with that for sure. I think I've covered most of what I think is interesting in here. Ruth Ann, do you have anything you want to add to that? Should I go deeper into things? Do I have any questions?
Yeah, I thought that was fabulous. Anyone want to ask some questions?
While you're thinking of your question or how to say it right, I will also just remind you that you can press at a time to scroll down if you don't want to do that yourself. And the thing I really like is you can also go to the home anytime to come back to your home. It's an intuitive program, and I just go back to that crumpling up and throwing in the trash my results. I can look at this one day and be a little overwhelmed, and then I can come back and look at it again and start to read about things. So it's really, Derby, it's really great. So thank you. Unless there's other questions.
I have a question. Heather, I know that there were certain studies that did the testing 24 hours after a fire, and then it was like a couple weeks, and then a more extended period of time. What was this one in particular?
So this one is before that, right? And so this was one where we just did a one-shot time TIF. This was a biomonitoring where we took your blood and your urine one time. The one that you're talking about is the most recent one that is attached to the Women Biomonitoring Collaborative with the nurses. And we had a smaller sample. We didn't have 85 people. We only had 15. And that was that post-fire analysis, what you're talking about. We don't have the results for that. And we took it within 24 hours. We took samples of your blood and urine, and then they tested a week and then a month later. And so what they will be able to tell on that is kind of how long it stays into your system, or how fast we're if we have levels of some of these similar chemicals, I'm sure is what we'll be seeing, how long they last. This one, they were looking at these results, Tiff, and I don't think you were in yet when we were doing these, so you weren't a part of this one, but these ones, it was really just, we asked a lot of questions about our behavior and all of these things that could help us understand those levels, but it wasn't after a fire event. Or if it was, we said that this one person happened to have an event, you know, before they came and took this. So that's kind of, does that make sense?
Yes, that's perfect.
Cool.
Thank you.
Cool. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen now. Good. Cool.
Thanks, Heather. That was really helpful. And like Heather said, if anybody's reviewing the results and ever has questions, please use the information in the dialog box. That's our WFBC report at Gmail email. I'm answering those, and the phone, you will get a voicemail because it's a Google phone, but we will answer those and connect you with our scientists that can help you with any specific questions you have about your results. So feel free to reach out to us. We're always happy to talk to you. And then I think we should open it up for any other just generic questions. If anybody has questions about the aggregate results that Jess talked about or Nancy's presentation, anything at all, now's your time.
You want to stop recording?
Oh, thank you, Jess. Multiple brains are always better than my one brain. I'm going to stop recording and then you can feel free to